The topic that's been assigned to me on SEBI regulations is quite a vast topic, and I'm not actually going to go into the theory of compliances and the SEBI regulations, because I'm sure each one of you here has been handling it regularly over the years. But I would like to take this opportunity to speak on a couple of practical issues relating to compliances, more from a secretarial audit perspective, and also with respect to the provisions of Companies Act, which is now actually going to tie in with the provisions of SEBI regulations. And also, I would like to take some time on provisions of listing agreement, which and also the proposed amendments to clause 36, which is actually going to make it far more tougher and difficult in the months and years to come, which of course also throws open a challenge because it's absolutely aligned to the laws in foreign jurisdictions. The main provision being with respect to insider trading regulation, I would like to devote a little bit of time on the new insider trading regulations, which is going to become effective from the 15th of May this year. If one were to look at the underlying feature of the Companies Act 2013, one thing which actually stands out completely and in a very clear fashion is one of corporate governance. Corporate governance underlies every single major provision of Companies Act 2013. And in line with the provisions of corporate governance, if one were to read the different provisions of different laws, it actually ties in. And when you look at the provisions of SEBI regulations, Section 93 is the section which immediately comes to my mind. Section 93, the way it is in the Companies Act 2013, refers to any change in shareholding to be informed to the Registrar of Companies. Now, if, of course, the rules further clarify that it's only a change with respect to 2%. This 2% has also led to a lot of interpretation. There are two specific schools of thought as to whether 2% of the shareholding of the promoter group should be considered, and that's a very simple calculation there. But if you look at the top 10 shareholders, this is a category which keeps shifting, and therefore it's not very easy to look at 2% of shareholding of the top 10 shareholders. Having said that, one school of thought is to consider 2% of shareholding of the entire list of top 10 shareholders and treat it as one category, and if there's any change which crosses the threshold of 2%, then to ensure compliance under Companies Act. Of course, the other school of thought is it's going to be 2% of the paid up capital, and that would be taken as the threshold. I personally subscribe to the first school rather than the second one. It should be 2% of the respective category of promoters holding or of that of the top 10 shareholders. Basically, this particular provision is relevant to any price-sensitive information, and PSI, or price-sensitive information, is a very nebulous term. It's not something which can be etched on tablets of stone, and it keeps changing as the transactions in the securities change. This particular provision should be read in conjunction with the definition of the term listed company under Companies Act 2013. Under the Companies Act 1956, a listed company was necessarily a public limited company, but now a private company would also be considered as a listed company, as the reference to a public company has been dropped from the definition of listed company. Having said that, moving on to the provisions of secretarial audit and in particular Form MR3, the reference to the SEBI regulations, most of these regulations in particular specifically exempt private companies. For example, the major provision being of takeover regulations. In takeover regulations, the transfer of shares of a private company has been specifically exempted under subclause K. This is because if the acquisition of shares of a private company does not result in acquisition of shares or control of a listed entity, then the regulations, takeover regulations, will not get attracted. However, the takeover regulations is one major provision, one major set of rules which one will need to check continuously with respect to compliances. Takeover regulations, of course, as everyone is aware, broadly covers two kinds of transactions. One is where you acquire shares which trigger an open offer, and the second is with respect to a harmless provision of disclosure. With respect to takeover offers, it's fairly simple. If you've crossed the threshold, you need to make a takeover offer and an open offer has to be made. It's with respect to the disclosure that one very often finds problems. And disclosure under takeover regulations is required to be done not only with respect to the threshold of 5% and if the persons who hold more than 5% need to give disclosure as well as a continued disclosure, even with respect to the pledge of shares, disclosure is required to be made. Once again, pledge of shares can be linked to the disclosure under Section 93 of the Companies Act. What I'm basically trying to arrive at is that while you have a disclosure under the SEBI takeover regulations, this disclosure will now be tied in with the disclosure which is made in Form NGT 10 with the Registrar of Companies. It might well so happen that one may have made one disclosure and omitted to make the other, in which case it automatically comes under the scanner. So there is a bit of tying in which has happened in the SEBI regulations read with Companies Act 2013. It's also important to note that takeover regulations with respect to acquisition or with respect to acquisition of shares exceeding the threshold and therefore the disclosure, as well as the disclosure with respect to pledge of shares, if there is any requirement to file any open offer with SEBI, disclosure right from 1997 is generally asked by SEBI, in which case even a lapse in the past would automatically come before the authorities. And the penal provisions penalty under takeover regulations is pretty stringent. It can also mean criminal prosecution, and of course steep fines go without, are definitely a part of the penal provisions under takeover regulations. And therefore it makes compliance fairly stringent there. In the earlier session, we were discussing on risk and having a risk plan. It is very essential to have a detailed risk plan with respect to compliances under SEBI regulations, apart from various other ones. And of course, risk plan has also become compulsory with respect to companies which are listed in the top 100. And therefore, the risk plan with respect to compliances under SEBI regulations in particular and compliances in general plays a very important role. In risk identification and risk mitigation and the residuary risk is something which will need to be continually checked and audited from time to time, apart from placing it before the board. It would be a good idea actually to have a separate takeover audit, takeover regulation audit, so as to ensure that one does not have any adverse remarks in the secretarial audit. Of course, the other provisions go without saying, but at the same time, with respect to takeover, since it dates back to a period well beyond one financial year, it would be a good idea to get this takeover regulations checked from time to time. The other important provision is with respect to insider trading regulations, which is going to become effective from the 15th of May this year. The major change has been with respect to definition of connected persons. We all are familiar with the term designated person, which was a term which was used under the insider trading regulations of 1992. This term has now been expanded and it now covers any person who's connected with the company, not just in the present, but it dates back to about 6 months. Rightly so, because if you're actually considering an acquisition, it definitely goes on for a reasonable period, and therefore persons who are privy to such an information should also be considered and should also be bound by insider trading provisions, and more particularly with respect to trading in the securities of the company based on unpublished price-sensitive information. In fact, this provision under the insider trading regulation of 2015 is absolutely in line with the provisions in foreign jurisdictions, Australia, UK, other countries in Europe or US, as the case may be. It's very interesting to note that in Australia, apart from a trading window, apart from the concept of a trading window, a company also has the flexibility of pulling out its shares for a limited period if there is a major transaction that's going on. It's more like a self-regulatory mechanism where you stop trading on your own shares because there is a price-sensitive information. In India, even under the 2015 regulations, we do not have a similar provision. However, the responsibility of the companies has actually gone up manifold because you now have Schedule A and Schedule B, which basically deals with the manner in which the company would deal with price-sensitive information, as well as a code of conduct or the processes which the company would have with respect to price-sensitive information being handled and unpublished price-sensitive information being handled by the employees of the company. Of course, we've always had the concept of Chinese wall being used with respect to dealing with price-sensitive information, but the liability, which is the test of liability which is used in the US, is one of a professional exercising due diligence in dealing with price-sensitive information. Just to give an example, let's assume there is a senior executive of an organization who's traveling by his private car, and while he's in the car, in the midst of a big negotiation, and while he's in the car, he receives a call. He speaks on the phone on a matter which he presumes his driver does not understand. And his driver, since he's been hearing his master for a long, long time, understands the communication perfectly well and trades in the shares of the company, makes a profit. Will this amount to price-sensitive information? Will this driver be considered as a connected person? It's a grey area as per the Indian law. But if this were to be tested as per the US provisions, this definitely would have been a violation of insider trading regulations, because the person, the senior executive concerned, has not handled the price-sensitive information in a proper manner, thereby, by virtue of his actions, has led to the price-sensitive information being passed on. So it's not an advice which is directly given, but it is the way in which he's handled price-sensitive information. In some ways, indirectly, this is covered in Schedule A of the Insider Trading Regulations 2015. However, this would, in the Indian context, may appear to be taking it a little too far, but this is going to be the future course of events as we go along, because we've been borrowing heavily from foreign jurisdictions and from the practices overseas. Also, insider trading regulations have to be read in conjunction with notifications filed with the stock exchange, with intimation given to the stock exchange from time to time under Clause 36 of the listing agreement. Today, Clause 36 appears to be a very innocuous looking 7-line statement where it says that any matter which may lead to, which may be price sensitive will require intimation to the stock exchange. But if you take a look at the proposed Clause 36 as well as the annexures to the proposed Clause 36, the kind of events which require disclosure is going to go up considerably. In the proposed Clause 36, it's actually gone up to a great extent. The proposed Clause 36 has considered two broad areas. One is areas where the company considers the information to be material and something which would affect the prices of the securities. And the second are list of illustrations which are considered to be per se price sensitive. When you refer to something which is per se price sensitive, I'm tempted to refer to Section 33 of the old MRTP Act, which has been repealed, but at the same time, Section 33 had a list of instances where transactions were considered to be per se restrictive trade practices. We have a similar one under proposed Clause 36 to the listing agreement. Just to give an example, let's assume there is a fire in a unit. Now, fire in a unit can be interpreted as a place where manufacturing operations is going on, and there's no dispute in that. However, when you refer to a fire in the unit, it may be a material transaction, it may be a material event, or it may be an event which is not material at all. Consider a situation where there is a fire and which rages for maybe 2 hours, but it happens on a day when there is no production in the factory. So there is absolutely zero loss to the company monetarily as well as from a production loss perspective. I said monetarily because it may have occurred at a place where there was no raw material or work in process stored, and it may have just been doused by the sprinklers, leading to a minuscule 50,000 rupees of expenditure to get some basic work done in terms of cleaning. Going by the proposed clause 36, you would require a disclosure even on this, because the proposed clause 36 does not distinguish between such events as something which is material, while there are many other events where it refers to it as material. I'm referring to proposed clause 36 because proposed clause 36 and insider trading, or the current clause 36 and insider trading regulations, are very closely linked. When you refer to insider trading and a price sensitive information, it would definitely be linked to the spike in the share prices as well as somebody dealing in those shares. It would have to be a designated person, or it would have to be a connected person who's dealt in those shares. It's immaterial as to whether that person has actually profited from the transaction or not. Everyone here would be aware of the kind of stringent provisions that were invoked in a recent decision in the US. And we actually are going to see very, very stringent provisions being invoked even in India under the insider trading regulations of 2015, because we have similar provisions here now. With respect to the other major change under the insider trading regulations, it also would cover, the term trade has been defined in a broader sense, and it will now cover any kind of dealing in shares. Trade under the insider trading regulation of 1992 merely covered purchase and sale, while under the new regulations it will cover any kind of dealing. The term any kind of deal would immediately cover pledge of shares. And when you refer to pledge of shares, you can then look at the series of transactions which will automatically get triggered. Clause 41 of the listing agreement requires pledge of shares by promoters to be clearly disclosed in the results. You have Section 93 of the Companies Act, which requires disclosure, of course subject to the thresholds being met. And you also have the takeover regulations where pledge gets reported. And you have clause 35, which gives shareholding pattern, where once again you would be showing you would be making a disclosure with respect to pledge of shares. You do have other provisions of SEBI regulations like buyback of shares, or provisions applicable to RTAs. That's applicable only if it is an RTA or it has where the company is doing it in-house with respect to the share transfer agent's work. Or where the company has given ESOPs, which of course the ESOP regulations are now going to be replaced, have been now replaced by the share benefit scheme, share and employee benefit schemes, which also includes the SARS and the retirement benefit schemes. Or you have the ICDR regulations, which relate specifically to issue of capital, which would be covered under Section 42 or under Section 62 of the Companies Act 2013. These compliances in any case are specific event-based compliances with respect to ICDR, ESOP or the like, and therefore would automatically get covered when you have a merchant banker taking care of this particular event. But it's generally the corporate action where the trigger point is a corporate action where you have challenges, as I mentioned with respect to pledge of shares. ESOP, one major change which has happened under the new regulations is that earlier exercise of ESOP shares during a window closure was permitted, which is now no longer there in the new regulations. So exercise of ESOP shares, if it happens during a window closure, it will have to be kept in unlimited suspension, and only post window closure can the exercise be permitted. And of course the basic procedural compliances with respect to the pricing and ensuring that the resolutions are passed and ensuring that the shareholders' resolution is also in place are all procedural compliances which would have to be taken care of. Delisting and buyback are other provisions which will also have to be considered while taking note of SEBI regulations. What is important is, in case of SEBI regulations, one would have to very closely check the provisions of listing agreement and the intimations made by the company to the various stock exchanges while checking provisions of SEBI regulations. Of course, as I mentioned, there is a very close link with provisions of Companies Act also. Management representation would form the first starting point for doing a proper and detailed check with respect to compliances under the Companies Act, in particular with respect to Section 93 and intimations to the stock exchange under the listing agreement will have to be checked, post which the specific checking of the various provisions of SEBI regulations. You would observe that while there are various SEBI regulations which have been covered in the Secretarial Auditor's Report in MR3, most of these are event-based compliances. Broadly, with respect to compliances, you would either have an event-based compliance or a calendar-based compliance. And most of the compliances with respect to SEBI regulations are event-based compliances, while there are few calendar-based compliances too. For example, the continual disclosure which is required to be given under the takeover regulations is a calendar-based compliance which the company will have to ensure and comply with. Or for example, even with respect to the insider trading regulations, wherever there are disclosures to be made, it will have to be accordingly considered. For example, the threshold limit of 5 lakhs is actually going up under the new regulations to 10 lakhs, but it refers to 10 lakhs in a quarter, which means if there are series of transactions which do not exceed 10 lakh, but the last one takes it little above the tipping point, then the company will have to ensure that this, at that particular juncture, the provisions of insider trading regulations are complied with. Not just the company, the insider concerned, the connected person concerned will also have to ensure compliance by giving necessary disclosures to the company, which the company in turn discloses to the stock exchange. With respect to disclosures which are required to be made when one exceeds the limits, under the insider trading regulations of 1992, an officer was defined as an officer as defined in section 230 of the Companies Act 1956, while with respect to the new regulations of 2015, it would cover any official of the company. Just to give an example, if the HR head of the company were to buy shares in excess of the market value of 5 lakhs under the old regulations, there was no requirement to intimate the stock exchange under the 92 regulation, while under the 2015 regulation, any officer who is otherwise a connected person would automatically need to comply with it. Although under the 92 regulation, he may have been treated as a designated employee, he would still not be required to file an intimation with the stock exchange, which is now the major change under the insider trading regulation. In case of private companies, there is a threshold up to which the shares can be issued. There is a threshold on the number of persons to whom shares can be issued in a year. I mean, it places a limit of 200 persons if it's a private placement where a company issues shares. Let's consider a condition. Let's consider a situation where a company issues shares to, let's say, 3 persons. The 3 persons are 3 portfolio management schemes, and each of these portfolio management schemes, let's assume, in turn have 100 individuals who are participating in each of those schemes. Will this fall foul of the limit of 200? Is a question that I would like to throw at you. Let me repeat my question. There is a company which has made a private placement. There are 3 portfolio management schemes which have applied for the shares, and each of these portfolio management schemes have 100 persons who have subscribed to those portfolio management schemes of those respective mutual funds. What is the compliance? And if somebody were to check, because one of the compliances is with respect to issue of securities, and let's assume this is an unlisted company with a turnover of let's say 300 crores, which is far in excess of 250 crores. Would this be considered as a private placement, or will this require further compliances?
I don't think any compliance is required.
Okay. Okay. Only one share will be entered in the register of members. Okay. Under the portfolio management scheme of SEBI, the portfolio manager is supposed to be acting on behalf of the principal, and he gets a power of attorney stating that he is only acting in a fiduciary capacity and he is a trustee. And after the allotment is done, while allotment is done in the name of one single individual, that is the portfolio management scheme, or rather let me call it one single person, that is a portfolio management scheme, which is represented by the company, and therefore it is shown as so-and-so company account so-and-so PNS. After the shares are allotted, from the pool account, shares automatically go to those individual members of the portfolio management scheme. So let's assume you were to take a BenPOS after 3 days after allotment. You would actually have 300 members there. The question is, at the stage of allotment, you only have one member. So therefore, your allotment is not to more than 200 persons in a year. So you have not violated. Could be one interpretation. There is no simple answer to this. However, in my opinion, this attracts provisions of section 89, which deals with beneficial ownership. Because although it is for a temporary period, the portfolio manager is the ostensible owner whose name is entered in the register of members. If you say that it is the portfolio manager, the company whose name is entered in the register of members, then section 89 will need to be complied with. And if it is shown that it is actually in the name of those individuals, then you're actually going beyond 200. And there isn't a third way of looking at it. These are the only two options which are available.
How many folios need to be entered into the books of the companies, like the three different, but the one single holding can have the three different portfolio managers?
Sure. Good question. Actually, at the time of allotment, the company is going to only allot to 3 different persons. And these 3 different persons are the ostensible owners with beneficial ownership vesting with those 100 each of those 3 schemes. So from a company's perspective, it's got only one form, and based on which the company has proceeded with the allotment of shares. So therefore, the company may say that to us, it is only an allotment to 3 different persons. Okay. But coming to your question of number of folios, 2 days after the allotment, when the pool account is liquidated, the shares automatically go to the demat account of those respective individuals. So you're going to have 300 individuals there.
That's fine. The another question comes the moment there is a change in the shareholding. There is
Right.
a change in the shareholding, like if funds are holding the shares at different 3 fund managers are holding under the net of one company only. Then looking at MGT 10, there is an issue.
Sure. Okay, there are 2 points here. One is there is a specific exemption to mutual funds from section 89. But portfolio management schemes are not necessarily mutual funds. Okay. Coming back to the point of MGT 10, yes, from an MGT 10 perspective, top 10 shareholders, we only have 3 over here, okay, and the shareholding is then going to get broken down. So you would actually be filing an MGT 10 with respect to each of these. Yeah.
Because if the 3 portfolios are there under the net of one company, the consolidated change has to be seen over a period of 15 days, for the purpose of reporting.
And top 10 shareholders would actually mean 100% of the shares which have been allotted under this. And if there is any change in excess of 2%, you're required to report your MGT 10. So 2% of this would then form your basis of reporting.
For MGT 10, 2% of the individual.
That's right, yes. If you refer to the form, MGT 10 in the form actually refers to 2% of that individual folio, which is definitely not the intention, because if you go by the circulars, that's not the way it is.
And we have discussed this matter in the ministry, because a lot of various professionals what is happening, but there is an issue with the form only.
Sure. It is an issue with the
With
form.
the informal discussion with the ministry, they have the opinion, yes, it should be 2% of the paid up capital, not it should be individually form 2 is taking up. They are coming with some clarification in time to come. They are looking into the form. We are also making on Monday the formal request in this regard. The last week only we discussed.
I think there are three different views here. Whether it should be 2% of that folio, definitely is not the intention, so that view is taken out. 2% of the paid-up capital is at the other extreme, and going by the clarification issued by the ministry, where it says 2% of their shareholding. Now, there would mean there are 2 categories, promoters and top 10 shareholders. And there would mean 2% of promoters' shareholding or 2% of the top 10 shareholders' shareholding. There could be 2 interpretations here. One is, yes, that is the intention, because if there is a change of more than 2% of the top 10 shareholders' movement, from a stock exchange perspective, it is material and therefore automatically becomes a price-sensitive information, and hence you require noting to be made, and hence there is a shorter time limit of just 15 days within which you are required to intimate the stock exchange, within which you are required to intimate the ROC, I'm sorry. But the intention, if you compare this with the SEBI regulations, it should be 2% of the share capital of the company. Because if you refer to 2% of the top 10 shareholders, assume a situation where 75% is held by the promoters and top 10 shareholders hold, let's say, 5% of the share capital of the company. 2% of 5% is going to be a minuscule figure. So therefore, a clarification will certainly be in order.
Indeed required, otherwise 50% of the companies will be defaulting.
I think 50%, 70% of the companies are today grappling with all the forms.
There is challenge for sectoral audit actually.
Sure, absolutely. In fact, the major challenge is going to be compliance of Companies Act 2013 rather than the other provisions, because most of it is with respect to event-based compliance, and board procedures is quite a long topic in itself. Yes, please.
Madam, my question is regarding private investment of the PMS.
Sure.
The section 42 of the Companies Act 2013 provides that at the time of making private placement offer, persons to whom the offer is made is identified.
That's
how
right.
when we are making to the PMS, if we are making to 3 PMS, only 3 persons will be counted.
That's right.
And the allottees are not, individuals are not identified at that time.
The point is, individuals from a company's perspective are not identified, but if you refer to the status of a PMS, okay, is that it is, unless it's a mutual fund which is recognized, otherwise if it's a PMS, then it is representing its principles. So if the PMS applies in its own name, which is quite possible, then you would have section 89 getting attracted, because the ostensible owner is different from the beneficial owner. From a company's perspective, the company recognizes this individual. I'm not on violation of 200, I'm only saying that if it is a PMS, then you have section 89 which gets attracted. Because the ostensible owner is different from the beneficial owner.
For private placement, only 3 persons will be counted.
Yes, from an allotment perspective, yes. Yes, please. Sure. Top 10 shareholders of the company, after this allotment is done, yes, of course. Entity tax, yes, yes. I think I'm standing between you and your lunch.
E-form entity tan is taking the view that 2% of individual folio is to be taken out. Can we take a different view that 2% of that class or 2% of the paid-up capital of the company? Because
Can you just repeat the question, the first part of it?
entity tan takes the view that 2% of individual folio is to be calculated.
Right.
Then the company is on looking at the discussion, take a different point that 2% and total paid-up capital or a class can be taken out, because since now as on date no clarification has been
Sure.
given in this regard.
I'll give you my view. It's not definitely a clarification of MCA, but my view is you should take 2% of the holding of that class. Because I would take this view because of the circular which was issued, saying that it should be of that particular category. So you take 2% of promoter holding, 2% of top 10 shareholding as the threshold. And if there is a movement of of purchase or sale of any individual or any person, then it requires filing. What you need to do is, it may be a series of transactions. You need to take a starting point, 1st of April being the starting point, and then see as to how the share movement has happened over the period of time. Right? So 2% of that particular class would be a better way. Definitely cannot be 2% of the paid-up capital, although there are few forms which have been filed with 2% of the paid-up capital, and I'm told they've also been approved.
Can we take this different, because the law form is part of the law, and law is taking a different route that will be considered as non-compliance if we are not conceding the 2% per folio at this point of time.
It's being accepted. If you take it this way, it is being accepted. And it will be, once it is accepted, it's fine.
Both the theories.
It is accepting as 2% of paid up capital as well as 2% this way. Although the form says 2%, it is accepting it
They
this
have
way.
not applied their mind now. They will apply the mind when they prosecute.
No. Once they say a form is approved, they will not prosecute. But 2% of that class is a reasonable way of taking it.
But in case of man,
They are also accepting. Yeah, they are approving it. That's true. Yes, please.
but in case of top 10 shareholders,
Yeah.
is it possible that number of individual shareholders have changed?
That's right.
I take top 10 shareholders in today's day. They will be different persons.
Sure.
After 1 week, when next data is out, the number of persons will be different.
Absolutely. So what you do is,
There will be difference of 2%.
sure. So what you do is, as on 1st of April 2014, let's assume you had 20 persons who were in the list of top 10 shareholders. Maybe Mr. 19, Mr. 17 and Mr. 15 may have dropped off, and you may have either had 3 more persons coming in, or it may have been 20 minus 3 as the top 10 shareholders, with some of them increasing their shareholding. So you would possibly have 2, 3 who may keep coming up, okay, from the outside list, or you may have the top 10 changing in their order because they may have acquired shares, they may have sold shares, which typically happens with all the FIIs. But when you have a threshold, what you need to do is you need to have this list. You need to see as to what this 2% threshold would translate into shares and see whether there is any change which takes it beyond this, and then accordingly file your form NGT 10, which is possible. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I fully agree with you. I fully agree with you. Sure. I think I could close over here. It's really been interesting and very enriching having this session. Thank you very much.